Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, November 22nd, 2022. For those of you that might be new to this format, if this is your first time, this is an open form question and answer. So, any topics you want to address, if you're a live audience member, you could submit them at any time. Becky, who's moderating for me this evening, will pass those on when the next question is up. We have a couple of pre submitted questions that I'm going to get to and some slides and some things that I've been thinking about. Before I launch into the content tonight, I wanted to announce something I'm very excited about for clinicians out there listening to the broadcast or even watching the broadcast. I'll be holding a masterclass on attachment-based therapy in the new year. We had originally scheduled for January, but due to some conflicts, we're pushing it back a little bit and changing the date. But I'm very excited. It's going to be an all-day class. We're going to cap it, so it's at a level where I can interact with the audience members. I can go over cases. I can answer each participant's specific answer. It's a very affordable program. I think we're charging $250 per person for potentially 6 CEs, continuing education credits. So if you want to learn more about it, you can go to our website. You can also, as always, anytime you have a question, you can email intensives@evoketherapy.com and feel free to send in questions, suggestions, comments throughout the week, and we can always put those on the next open forum like tonight. So let me share with you. I've been doing this lately during these open forums to give you some chance for the live audience to come up with your questions that you might have. But what I've been doing is also just seeding this with a little bit of the things that I've been thinking about and writing about lately. And recently I had a client who asked me, he said, I feel so stuck. This was in the normal course of a session. He said, I feel so stuck. I give my right arm to be happy. And in essence, what I said to him was the good news, of course, is that you don't have to give up your arm. But really, what we have to work on in these sessions is to give up your guilt and your shame. And that might be so much harder than you can possibly comprehend or imagine. We're so afraid to give up our guilt and shame because we've been programmed in our culture and most cultures that guilt and shame are virtues, even. I'm going to be talking about that. In fact, that's the next entire broadcast is talking about this concept, at a deeper level. But suffice to say, for this slide, this point I wanted to share tonight is guilt and shame are energies that block your awareness. Your children, your partners, the people that you've wronged, they don't need your guilt. In fact, if you come with a noticeable amount of guilt, there'll be an instinct, an urge, a sense that they'll have to take care of you. So to improve, to become more aware of yourself, to see the mistakes, to become accountable, and that's the great paradox. To become more accountable in our lives for what we've done, we have to get rid of our guilt and shame because that's going to block it. And another piece that I talk about is because of the creating the idea that guilt is a virtue. There's this idea in our culture that says good people feel bad, right? The only way you can really be pious or righteous or good or ethical or moral is if you feel bad. And so it's this perpetuating cycle of shame and guilt. One thing I want to be clear about, and I've written about this extensively in both of my books, is this idea that often therapists, clinicians will distinguish between guilt and shame. I think the distinction is irrelevant. I know what is said. Shame is feeling bad for who you are. Guilt is feeling bad for what you do. But really, both of them are a sense that something about me is flawed and broken. And with that energy in my body, it's going to be more difficult for me to look at my mistakes, to look at my errors, the way that I wound people, the way that I hurt people, the way I show up in the world. So the work in psychotherapy, as paradoxical, and even frightening as it might seem, is to learn to release guilt and shame. And what do you replace it with? You replace it with love and courage and empathy and compassion for yourself and for other people. But again, we've been taught that the only way that people get better, people do better, is because they feel guilt. And in my experience, it's one of the most corrosive teachings in our society, especially within the psychotherapeutic industry, within the self help industry. This idea that you've got to feel guilt, that there's a healthy guilt. I cannot tell you, and I'll kind of end this topic with this. I cannot tell you the numbers of times that people have said to me, I feel guilty about doing the right thing, in essence, setting a boundary, holding a limit. They'll even say to me, I know what I need to do. I know what's the right thing for me to do. And when I ask, what's stopping you? The answer is often guilt. So there is some deprogramming we have to do around this idea of guilt. And really, psychotherapy, in a sense, is, if we can get rid of guilt and shame, everything else is pretty easy, right? Then we're students. Then we can learn. Then we can evolve. Then we can grow. And the phenomenally great paradox is it's only when I accept myself that I can truly change. And this is something else I've been thinking about this week, because there's a few concepts here. The concept of doing your work, of knowing your truth. And I think those phrases can sound to a lot of people, it can hit their ears like psychobabble, like a bunch of, you know, uh, 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 very cloudy ideas and issues. I get asked all the time, what does it mean to know your truth? Or what does it mean to do your work? So I thought about this week and wrote these slides out. These are four ideas about finding your truth. The first principle, or first idea, is that sometimes the truth comes to us like a vision, right? An epiphany, a rapturous, complete idea. I remember when I was in my first semester of college, I had this experience where I thought, I know I want to be a psychotherapist. I'd entered college with the idea that I would be an English teacher. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and you had to select a major, so that was the major that I chose. But after taking one child psychology course, I realized this is what I've been meaning to do, been training to do my entire life. I didn't know, of course, every detail about it, but I knew I was going to be a therapist. I knew I was going to be a psychotherapist. So sometimes we get lucky and it comes to us like that. But maybe more often, and for most of us, for many of us, this truth comes little by little, one foot in front of the other. We learn to choose daily, minute by minute, the things that we prefer, the things that we like, want, and love. We learn to say no to the things that don't feed our soul. I had this image up on our refrigerator before we moved to this house a few years ago. I just love it. Brian Andreas is the artist and the author, I believe. And for those of you that aren't watching me live, it's a beautiful picture. It looks like watercolor. And the quote goes like this: her whole life shifted the day she started to tell the truth about what made her happy. I never knew it could be that simple, she said. And again, it frightens us. We have been taught in our families, in our culture, often in our religions, that our basic instincts are not good, that we have to overcome who we are. And it's true that seeking for pleasure specifically, to not feel unhappiness or unpleasant feelings, could lead to all sorts of destructive behaviors, both to us and to the people that we love. But there's something more profound here. And that is, as we learn, and it takes time and it takes practice, and most importantly, it takes mistakes. Look at our children. Look at our teenage children, our adolescent brain children from 13 to 25 or so. They are in the stage of life where they're trying to define their identity. They're trying to find their truth, find out who they are. And as we know, those listening to this broadcast, many of them know, that involves a lot of messes, a lot of missteps and mistakes, a lot of getting in trouble. But that's the process. And it's so funny because as adults, we know that. Most of us know that. Some of you may have gone through life just grace upon grace, never making big mistakes. I'm not one of those people. I don't know many of those people. So we make great mistakes. We make mistakes about marriage, about parenting, about relationships, about careers, about financial decisions, right? About friendships. We make all kinds of mistakes, and that's the lesson. I read this quote the other day that I've never quite heard it said so simply, that I believe into my core. And it said something like this: that if we went back and erased all of our mistakes, we'd essentially be erasing who we are. Because most of the wisdom that we have that's worth its weight comes from the missteps, the detours, the sidetracks, the regressions. So sometimes finding your truth is just learning to say what you feel, what you want in the moment, learning to say no, learning what to say yes to. I know it's a silly example, but I use the example of the fact that I don't like mushrooms in my food. And it can be as simple as that. I remember just recently I was at a restaurant where a lot of the dishes that it was a small plates tapas type of restaurant, and a lot of the dishes had mushrooms in them. I didn't find that out until several of them had already arrived, and I thought about coming back because other than that, I thought it was a really great restaurant. And I thought, how do I communicate that I don't want mushrooms because people will try to talk me into it inevitably. But we learn to sit in our truth. I don't want to go to the movies. I'm hungry. I'm tired. I don't want to go out tonight. I do want to go out tonight. But most of us grew up in families and in cultures, not just parents, but in cultures where somebody else told us the truth about us. This will be good for you. You'll be grateful and glad that you did it. And the most insidious part of that story is that sometimes it ends up being that way. However, if the task is to know yourself, to be yourself, and I believe that means to be your giant, expansive self, capable of love and wisdom and courage and creativity. You have to practice choosing what you like and what you prefer. And yes, as we all know, there'll be some messes. But in the end, the most important task of becoming who we are, what I think is the goal of psychotherapy, requires that courage, that messiness. There's a great book that was recommended by Oprah Winfrey, which usually means it's a pretty good book, called The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. The author is Boyd Vardy, and he's explaining how they track lions. He's a soon to be master tracker, and he's learning from the master. And when they lose lion tracks, you look for first tracks again. They call them first tracks, and it's a and in many ways it's a very counterintuitive process because what he says is in the book, I don't know where we are going, but I know exactly how to get there. And that's the idea of step by step of first tracks. In Al Anon or in AA, they say, do the next right thing. For me, some of the most difficult decisions were to say to people, I don't know. Right now, I don't know what I want. I know it would be convenient. I know it would be efficient for me to know what I want right now. I know it would make the people around me happier to come out with a decision. But unfortunately, I'm in a place right now of not knowing, and that is my truth. Sometimes not knowing the grand plan, not knowing 2, 3, 4 steps ahead is not available to us. So the truth right now is I need to sit. I need to reflect. I need to walk. I need to talk this out until I figure it out. That's my truth. So truth isn't this ambiguous, neo-spiritual idea about some grand vision. It's learning to connect with the authentic self, the self that we had to give up in many cases. We believed and were taught to be accepted, to belong, to not stress out or overwhelm our parents because they gave us their anxiety, they gave us their emotions, their frustration, their disappointments. They thought by doing that we would somehow get a sense of a moral compass about what was right and what was wrong in the world. But that's not how it works, right? We learn by doing, we learn by making mistakes. And sometimes for some of us, as you know, we have to make the mistake 4, 5, 10 times just to make sure that the lesson that we're interpreting is accurately. Finally, on this last slide, I write, that's essentially the task of a therapist. Even for you parents who are coming to us, coming to me, have your children in our program, our wilderness program, it's essentially the task of the therapist not to lay out the truth for the client, to tell you the way to live, the way to be, but to help the client identify the small steps that eventually lead to a larger transformation of consciousness. I was reading just this week this idea, which I talk about and teach, We have to learn to think fundamentally differently than we were taught to think in our family of origin, for most of us, in so many ways. Enlightenment is a destructive process, meaning that it's more about unlearning than it is about learning. So many times when I teach young, gifted therapists, this happens so often. And as I talk and I teach them about the things that I teach all of you about on these podcasts, they'll say to me, in essence, sometimes literally, I knew it. I knew there was something deeper. I knew there was something more transcendent than the skills, the tools, the theories that I was given. I knew that there was this different way of thinking, and then they start to access their instincts, right? That they've been taught to be skeptical and suspicious of, and as they access their instincts, now that they've been freed up to embrace the truth when it hits them, they become so much more gifted. I had a therapist at Evoke one time named Mikey Mean. He's a legend in our program. Doesn't work for us anymore. Had a child and wanted to stay close to home. Didn't want those long drives out to the desert with his child. In any case, Mikey couldn't be more different than me. Long hair, has tattoos from his neck to his tippy toes. ADHD like you've never seen. Runs a minimum of 10 miles a day just to combat his ADHD. Learned that from his parents. Got accommodations in high school because his mother was an educator. Both of his parents were actually, where he could stand up and pace in the back of the class. Gives all the credit in the world to his mother specifically and his parents that he would have never made it through high school, let alone college and graduate school, without their support and help and advocacy. You know, I'm more philosophical, right? I love the 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 pursuit of intellectual disciplines. I love going back to Socrates, right, and Aristotle, and the philosophers Sartre. Those I love that idea of going back to the masters like Freud. And Mikey was just nuts and bolts. He swore a lot. He ate candy during the session relentlessly. Got the angriest young men in his group that he just absolutely loved, and just melted them with his disposition. And I said to Mikey after just a little bit of time spending with him, I said, "Do not try to be me. I mean that would be a horrible and poor outcome if you try to be me in this process. Instead, be you." And I said, "Teach me something about running," because he's a runner. His dad was a running coach, won a bunch of championships back in New Jersey. Might still be winning them. I'm not sure. And he said, "One principle that I learned as a runner is that when you're going uphill, take smaller steps and look down. Don't look to the horizon, and don't keep your stride as long as you would on flat or on downhill trails. You're going to slow down inevitably, but this is the way to maintain your energy, your pace, and not wear yourself out." And I said, "Mikey, that story is a great principle to teach parents and children. When it gets hard, when it gets uphill, don't look out in the distance. It's too far. Look down at the ground. Take smaller steps." I said, "Bring that. You were in a garage band in college. Bring the wisdom of being a guitar player in a garage band, in a punk garage band, right? Just bring your whole self to it, to the process." So there's not one universal generic truth out there. That's not my job as a trainer of therapists, as a psychotherapist, as a parent educator. It's using some basic principles and ideas, but really helping everybody become. It's what Kobe Bryant actually used to teach toward the end of his life a lot. What he called the Mamba mentality, which was to become the greatest version of you. And that's really what this work is about for your children and for your parents, in your marriage, in your life. I have one more slide that I wanted to share with you that hit me. It's not my quote. It's from Baba Ram Dass, who passed away a couple of years ago. A wonderful, wonderful light and human being in the world. And he said, I would like my life to be a statement of love and compassion. And where it isn't, that's where my work lies. I'll put a little caveat on there. When he says, I would like my life to be a statement of love and compassion, I would put in parentheses for myself and for others, because the two are inextricably linked to each other. You cannot have deep compassion for others unless you have it for yourself. And if you have it for yourself, it will naturally extend to others. That's the way that it works. And most importantly, this is the thing that's not said in this quote. It's a big deal what I'm about to tell you. I would like my life to be a statement of love and compassion. And where it isn't, that's where my work lies. This is not common sense what I'm about to tell you. It's not, it doesn't mean that you just get more compassionate and get more loving. See, that's what people translate enlightened ideas like, is they turn them into shoulds, into behavioral shoulds. You should love others. Right? We hear that. But the work of developing compassion and love is to start with yourself, first of all, which means that you're doing battle with guilt and shame, like I described in the beginning. That you're learning to take care of yourself, to practice self care, to say no, to limit the amount of energy that's going out. In so many ways, compassion is like a math equation. Not in all ways, but in some ways, meaning that the reason that the Dalai Lama is good at preaching love and kindness in the world is because he is relentlessly, folks, relentlessly committed to his own practice. In other words, he has boundaries. He doesn't overextend himself. I don't know his schedule, but I'm confident that he spends hours and hours during a week of attending to what he needs first. And we don't talk about that. I mean, the Buddhists will talk about their meditation, right? The religious will talk about their prayer. But really, the commandment should be take care of yourself and first and foremost. And then what you will have is enough left over to give to other people, enough love, enough energy to give to other people. You all know this because at the end of a hard day, when you've been grappling with children or with coworkers or with employees or with the people you're trying to sell your widget to, you are left without a lot of patience and compassion at the end of the day. Everybody listening to me knows that. And yet, we get stuck on you should be more loving and kind and compassionate. That's not the secret at all. The secret is to become boundaried. And resentment and anger, not always, but is very, very often a sign that you're not taking care of yourself. You're hoping everybody else will. And you end up resentful because they're not. And frankly, it's not their job. It's your job. Right? The idea is I'll use marriage. I'll use myself and my wife. It is not my job to make her happy. That is her job. And it's not her job to make me happy. That is my job. It's not my child's job to make me happy. It's my job. It is not my job to make my child happy. That is their job over the course of their life. So those are a couple of thoughts that were brewing around in my head that I wanted to share with you. So let's go into the questions. We have a couple of pre-submitted questions, and then there might be some coming in from you. Here's the first one. Someone says, I understand how important boundaries are, especially as boundaries can protect oneself from too much. My husband is very good at having boundaries of what he won't do. He can easily say, I'm not talking about that today. Can you speak on balancing others' boundaries with the need to discuss certain things in a more timely manner, especially when it is something that parents might need to discuss regarding a child before it's too late? Great question. Wonderful question. First and foremost, my answer is this. Marriage is about sacrifice, right? Marriage is about compromise, about submitting and yielding, about developing a we-ness, if you will, in the marriage. And part of that does rely on each individual partner, co-parent, taking care of them for themselves first and foremost. So the small answer is yes, it's okay. It's okay for your partner to take boundaries at times when it's inconvenient for you. That's inevitable. And ideally we support our partner when they take care of themselves. We don't guilt or we don't shame them. Right? That's the seeds of marital conflict and eventually divorce. Is to try to control the other person through shame and guilt. So yeah, there are going to be competing needs. But over the long run, the answer is, the question is, I suppose, not the answer, but the question is, how are we going to work this out? I need something from you. And part of your job in your own therapy, folks, part of your job is to figure out if you're asking something of your partner that you could do for yourself. But having a dialogue with your co-parent about a child is not something you can do by yourself. Alleviating your anxiety regarding your child is something at times you can do by yourself with your therapist, with your sponsor, with your support people in your life. So if it's about make me feel better, I'm going to bring my anxiety to you over and over again, then your partner might be in some pretty solid grounding to say, I can't do that all the time. Once in a while, I can. There's times when I can listen during the week, but I can't be responsible to mitigate your anxiety on a daily basis. That's something you're going to have to find somebody who can do that for you, like a psychotherapist. But if the response is, I'm not going to talk about this, I'm never going to talk about this, I mean, I'll take it to the nuclear option. Eventually, it can lead to a couple saying, you're. I'll give you a very silly. Please forgive me. If your partner likes to slap you when they're frustrated, obviously that's a silly example. You don't have to put up with that. If your child likes to call you names, excuse me, if your spouse or your co-parent likes to call you name and insult you to blow off some steam, you don't have to take that. If your partner says, I can't talk about this, it can become untenable for you. Now, the next question comes is how much is too much, right? That's the question everybody wants to ask is, am I giving too much? Am I a doormat? Am I sacrificing too much? Or am I being too rigid? Am I being too demanding of my partner? And the answer to that question is yes. You're asking the right question. And the answer is you. And what I mean by that is you get to decide. That is your life. And at least my position as a psychotherapist, is not to tell you when it's too much. If it gets severe, I'm going to chime in, of course. But there's no objective criteria out there about how much your spouse is supposed to talk to you and work through issues with you. You get to decide if it's enough or not. That is the question of figuring out who you are and what you need. And I would advise everybody in listening to my voice to make sure that your partner is not the only one that you go to, that you have other sources, that you cannot, it's not good for the marriage. It's not good for you. It's not good for them to be your everything, to take all your grievances, all your anxieties, all your worries, all your frustration, right? That's what a therapist is for. That's what a sponsor and a support group can be for. That's what a good trusted friend can be, a part of that network where you go to get that support. And something, it's shared for a reason. It's a shared journey for a reason. And you get to decide how much is too much one way or the other. Nobody else does. Not me or anybody else for that matter. All right. Somebody says, having a really hard time with my 14-year-old son. He has ADHD, is lying, not sleeping, failing classes in school, being disrespectful. He does what he wants and is completely unmotivated. I feel prepared because of reading your books and listening to your podcasts. We were hoping to be empathic others for him, and we'll also have him start counseling this week. Coming from a place of loving curiosity seems to be a key here. What are we trying to What are we trying? What we are trying is to stay patient, get curious, set boundaries. This is really hard. Is there a certain chapter, podcast, etc., that you would recommend that we check out? It's a tough question. It's a good one. You know, there's a Zen idea, a Zen Buddhist idea that I shared a couple of weeks ago that goes like this. It says, the way we do one thing is the way we do everything. When you understand this sensibility, when things shift, everything shifts. So my thought is, my favorite resources in the world, my favorite resources are that I know about are the books that I read and talk about, the books that I've written, the books by J.D. Gill, the books by James Hollis, Drama of the Gifted Child, Parenting from the Inside Out, just to name a few, Dance of Anger. Those are some of my go-to references. My podcast, other podcasts. We have a couple of more offerings coming up, like a conscious parenting workshop, psychotherapy, Finding You, our flagship intensive program, where you come and you spend 5 days to unravel who you are, to look critically, carefully at your background and your family of origin, to understand what messages, ideas, roles, and rules and assumptions are living in your body that you're carrying out. Do some of them need to be discarded and let go of? Do you need to move and evolve and get bigger? So I don't have a specific place, but it sounds like you already know. I want to be clear about one thing. You didn't exactly say it, but I want to be clear about this. Being an empathic other doesn't preclude setting a boundary, like sending your child to treatment or grounding them or taking away privileges. If those things are done without compassion and empathy and a parent's own work, then yes, it can become very damaging and toxic. It can become reductionistic, turning the child into just a bunch of behaviors instead of understanding what's going on underneath. When I bring questions about my own children to my therapist, who of course I'm a huge fan of, I think is a master, she'll always start off with, the first thing that comes to mind she'll say to me is, why is she doing this? Why is he doing this? And that exploration and understanding it gives me a different feel. It doesn't overtly dictate what I should do. You see, that's the biggest difference at Evoke from a lot of other models. And when I say at Evoke, I'm talking about attachment-based therapy. Is that we help parents evolve. We help them expand. We help them with some tools and some skills to help with all of that. And then they decide what to do. If I were an art teacher and Picasso and Van Gogh and Monet and Jackson Pollock were in my class and Michelangelo were in my class, I wouldn't teach them how to paint. Well, I'd be unqualified for the job, of course. But if I were qualified for the job, I wouldn't teach them how to paint. I would teach them ideas and principles, and they would become Picasso and Monet and Van Gogh and Michelangelo. They would paint their masterpiece, which is their art in this case, but also their life. So my answer is, it's something my therapist said to me recently, said to all of us recently in a training. Keep going. Keep going, you guys. And sometimes keep going means you've got to go through the fall apart. You've got to go through the crisis, either the one that your child might be creating or even the one that you're creating. And you don't have to go alone. You can find people to keep you company, to offer you support along the way. My daughter, Emma Reedy, a fantastic, gifted therapist, many years ahead of me at her same age. She says, I go to psychotherapy because breaking free of family patterns causes a great deal of guilt in me. So I go to psychotherapy, she said, so that my therapist can help me carry that guilt, so I don't have to carry it alone. Do you see the wisdom there? That's different than a tool to regulate the nervous system, which is a great tool, or a cognitive behavioral reframe, right? It's understanding what it means to be a human, because we weren't taught. I was just talking to a friend today. This had nothing to do with work or my clients. And I said to my friend, I said, um, the guilt and the shame that you're carrying around is your prison. You can't do what you need to for yourself because you'll feel horrible about yourself if you do. And yet, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to just carry around this anger and this resentment and this judgment for yourself and others. So my idea is go toward the guilt, walk through it. Go to somebody who can create a reparative experience where you can start to let go of that idea. Find a good attachment-based therapist who understands this. Next question. Somebody writes, my son has still not forgiven us for having him gooned to wilderness 6 years ago. It turned out to be a good experience for him, but the aftercare was a disaster. How do we get beyond this guilt? Get beyond the guilt. A couple of weeks ago, my daughter said something to me, my 15-year-old. I won't revisit the story, but suffice it to say, she gave me some feedback that was accurate and hard, and was evidence of everything I've tried not to do as a father. And this is my fourth child. Yes, I can easily talk about how with my first child, who's now 29, I made lots of mistakes, but I'm still making them today. And my first instinct was to run away, to pull back. I mean, I said the right things in our discussion, like, I'm sorry. And then when she said, you do it all the time, I said, I'll work on it. But then my guilt, as it rose in me, I wanted to retreat from the relationship, to say, you'll be better off without me. Part of it was passive aggressive. Part of it was just soothing myself. I fantasized about moving to a cabin in the mountains so I wouldn't hurt anybody anymore. These are the fantasies that popped up immediately in my mind. And then, of course, I realized the way I can do it differently is just stay present. I can stay present in my guilt. I can manage it. And I can listen. I can't fix what I've done in the past. And I can definitely working on this pattern in the future and in the present. But what I can really do is stay present and not let my guilt overwhelm me. And I can take the love that I have for my children, which is really the greatest love I'm capable of feeling for another person. And I can use that energy to overcome the instincts of the retreat and the disappearance and the escape and the numbing out that guilt compels me to do. So how do you get through the guilt? You sit with it. You learn over time to deconstruct it. You learn that it's not helping anybody. And really what I would say is let him be mad. If he bullies you and beats you up about it, you can set limits around that, of course. You always have a right to set any limit about conversations that you're willing to have and not have. Just like I said to the earlier question, the person who asked about their husband. And the secret to this one is don't try to get him to get over it. It's his. Not only do you make mistakes that you don't know anything about, but this was an attempt to help him. And according to him, it's a big mistake. It's a big injury. But in both cases, mistakes out of ignorance and mistakes out of just misguided ideas, the wound is his now. So you give it back to him by saying, I'm sorry, it happened. You're right. I get it. You have the right to feel this way as long as you want. And you stop there. You hand it back to him by letting it be. See, forgiveness, when we want forgiveness, and most of that need for forgiveness on our part as partners and friends and parents in this case, is for our ego. But when we do the deeper work, we realize we have to forgive ourselves. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by spending time with a capable, empathic therapist who can help you to deconstruct it. You replace the old tapes, the old voices in your head with new ones. It's tough work. And I'll say this just once tonight. It takes years, folks. And you never finish. Don't ever finish. Please don't ever finish. My therapist said the other day that she's in her 80s, right? She's got several postdocs. She's written 30 books. She's incredible. And she said that the greatest compliment you can give her is when you call her a student. Be a student and remember that your children are here to teach you, not the other way around. The lessons they will teach you greatly outweigh what you hope to teach them. Somebody writes, my son has been at Evoke now for 4 weeks, about 4 weeks. When do parents usually see a turnaround, or is it different for every kid? If possible, can you touch on shame and guilt for a little bit? I'm a little bit confused. I think I did that already. I know this question came in earlier, so before I talked about guilt and shame. So I think I've covered some of that. I also have webinars on that, podcasts on that, a couple of chapters in each of my books on that. About week 5, 4.5 is about average when you start to see a light come on for a lot of kids. And yes, of course, it's different for every kid because every kid is different. But what I tell parents, especially if it goes beyond the average, and sometimes it goes well beyond the average, months, years beyond the average even. I tell parents, don't wait for that. Don't hang your hope on that. Hang your hope on your transformation. Because if you change, everything else changes. Not because everything else changes, but because you're different. I walk through a museum now with the same artwork, and it is completely different to me than it was when I was in college. I read a book. I walk through the elementary school that I went to as a child. And if nothing has changed, it's a completely different experience because I've transformed. And oh, by the way, that kind of transformation I'm talking about does have positive ripple effects, positive waves, so to speak, that lap up against the shore of your child, of your marriage, of the people around you. The way you do one thing is the way you do everything. So about 4.5 weeks is average. That's the technical answer. Sometimes it extends long beyond that. But most importantly, work on your transformation. And watch for the discovery that your unhappiness is due to how you're living your life, not because of what your child is doing. And that it's not their job. It's not their job to give you peace and serenity. Peace and serenity are your responsibility. That's what you learn when you go to Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous. I'm responsible for my serenity. And that shift of being a boundaried, capable, accountable, courageous, loving person, and of course, there's no perfection in any of those things, just developing those attributes, those skills, those changes absolutely shine a warm, compassionate, positive light on everybody that you come into contact with. Make a difference. Somebody writes, we are beginning to talk about transition from Evoke to aftercare for our granddaughter, who's 13. This feels like a very important and crucial decision. How do we decide what is best for her? We know you have a webinar, and we have not listened to it. We plan to listen to it, but would appreciate your thoughts on this. The first thing I would say, in fact, I did a phone call this afternoon with an inquiring parent. The first thing I would say is ask tough questions and listen. You deserve to ask tough questions, and you deserve to have intelligent answers. Ask them to explain their conceptual framework about what they do and how they do it. Ask them how they use peers. Ask them how they choose a therapist. Ask them who the therapist would be. Ask them how they deal with regression and setback. Ask them about their ceiling, like what privileges can the child work up to, but ask them about their floor. When does it become too much for the program and for the school? Most importantly, don't be a pleasant, good, easy parent. I'm saying I don't mean be a jerk and be cruel and be mean. I don't mean that or combative. I mean deal with the shame and the guilt that many of us have. That I'm going to impose upon you my needs. I want to see how you respond to that. I want to see if you start getting tired of me and disdain for me. Because if that's how you react to me, I think that's going to filter through to my child eventually. It's part of your culture. I tell parents all the time at Evoke, you have a right to ask difficult questions and you have a right to receive intelligent answers. These programs are expensive, very expensive. But more than that, you're entrusting these programs with the person who arguably matters more to you than anybody in the world, along with your partner. And so you have a right to have your needs, your information attended to. Talk to if you get a chance to visit schools, talk to look why are they recommending this one over this one? And when you visit the schools, mingle with the students if you can. And they might give you a student to give you a tour, and that's going to be a student who's in a pretty positive mindset. But listen to everything. Listen to the kid that says the program stinks and listen to why it stinks from his, her, or their perspective. Be a critical, informed consumer where your needs matter also. And then at the end of the day, you make the best decision you can and you turn the rest of it over to the child. You know, ultimately the shift, right? The shift in adolescence from 13 to 25. The shift is the shift between my parents are responsible for my life to I'm responsible. That's the shift, one of them. And part of it, it's not because I say these words to my children that they take it on, but it's almost like I'm sharing a mantra, and the mantra is, it's your life. I'm not going to destroy our relationship because you don't seem to want to graduate from high school. I'm just not. When I was younger, I was willing to do that, but I'm not willing to anymore. I do have boundaries. I'm not. You're not on my watch. Gonna use substances with my. I'm gonna test. I'm gonna watch for it, and I'm gonna hold lines that I want to hold. But at the end of the day, you want to play around with disordered eating. You want to play around with self harm. You want to fight the school issue. And in the long run, it's your life. You're going to be out of the house in a few years, ideally, and you'll be living your own life without me. And someday, not too long in the distance, hopefully many years, but relatively speaking, it comes fast. Of course, I'll be gone, and it'll have nothing to do with me. It's not a lecture that I give. It's a way of thinking about the relationship. I've said it once or twice to the kids, but I don't think that they've picked it up as this great wisdom and epiphany from me. It's just I'm saying this is the relationship. I'm going to have my boundaries. I have responsibilities as the father, along with my wife, to make decisions about boundaries and limits and so forth. I have an internal um, responsibility to myself to develop compassion and understanding and look beneath the behaviors. I have a responsibility to take care of myself and to feel good about the way that I'm living my life as it pertains to being a father. I have responsibilities to take care of myself that has nothing to do with you, to be selfish in areas. But I'm not responsible for your life at some point, and we're transitioning to that right now. And I did dent you. Your mother and I both did dent you, and unfortunately, because we're human, we're probably not done with it. But now the dents are yours, and you're gonna have to figure them out. So you see, that's the sensibility. That's the thinking. And like a lot of things I teach you on these broadcasts, don't tell them that I said any of this. It's not for them. A lot of parents take the stuff that I teach and go and tell the child, because the hope is if I can convince the child that Brad's philosophy or Freud's philosophy or Carl Rogers, the great Carl Rogers' philosophy is right, then I don't have to set boundaries because you'll just change. This is for you, not for them. All right, I have time for one more question before we wrap up. If there's no guilt, how does one know when they are off track toward their values and truth? Love, empathy, compassion, pain, sadness, feeling. Guilt is fear-based. Guilt is I feel bad. That's the most simple expression of guilt, right? That I hear from people. I feel bad when I do X. And again, I said earlier, I know that therapists are very proud of themselves to point out that shame is feeling bad for fundamentally who you are, and guilt is feeling bad for what you do. But as I said earlier, remember this. Everybody listening to me, listening to me, can think of one, if not hundreds of examples where doing the right thing would still cause you guilt. And it's because of your family of origin programming. So you do it out of compassion and love. You do it out of joy. You do it out of an excess, right? I don't believe in the commandment to love your neighbor. It doesn't make sense to me. Why? To be good? No. I work on a practice of self-care and self-compassion, and the love comes out of that, and I love my neighbor out of that place. But the programming is so strong. The urge to control is so strong. The influence of fear in our lives is so strong that we translate this idea of enlightenment into you should love others. I tell you what, if I could tell you how to just flip a switch and do it, I'd give it to you. I'd flip the switch for you. But the work is something else. The work is healing. The work is unraveling your trauma. The work is developing self-compassion. And the key point is this. We know this from psychology. We know this. That when a person learns to feel their feelings, stay present with their feelings, they will recognize feelings in others and they will have compassion. If you learn not to feel your feelings, you won't see others as feeling creatures. You will lack empathy. But the cure to empathy is not to tell somebody to practice empathy. In fact, probably that overwhelming sense of guilt and shame is probably what is causing what looks like on the surface a lack of empathy. That's usually the origin, is an overwhelming flooding of guilt and shame, right? People learn compassion, empathy, connection for others by having it shown toward them. And when you're allowed to feel hurt, and it's safe to feel hurt, you see it in others. I remember I read The Secret Life of Bees, I think it was called, another Oprah Winfrey recommendation. She doesn't need my publicity tonight, but I do look at what she puts out there because, again, she usually has some pretty. I like her taste. Um, and there was a character in there who had this very thought, this very sensation. She could feel, feeling creatures. Think of the Dalai Lama, or it doesn't matter the person. Pick your ideal. I like Yoda. He's my favorite. He's neutral politically. He's neutral religiously, and he has compassion and empathy and care for the ants, right? The squirrels, the flowers. Guilt is not a reliable source of morality. I promise you that. It's just the opposite. But self-compassion, compassion towards others, love, courage, those things come out of a fully lived life, out of a complete self. I don't love people because I'm supposed to love them. I love people because I can. That's the difference. All right, folks, any leftover questions I can take to the next open forum. Let me go over some upcoming things. We have some new programming I want you to hear. Don't hang up on me. Don't tune off. We're moving the January 20th date, but I am teaching this masterclass on attachment-based therapy next year. If you have questions, contact intensives@evoketherapy.com. On February 1st, I am hosting a multi-couple intensive. It's like our Finding You program, but we're going to take a few couples. We've never done this before, and I've had this asked several times, so we're going to give this a try. It's going to fill up fast. There's only room for a couple of couples left. On February 24th, I'll have my third conscious parenting workshop. The first two have filled up, so we've opened this up due to popular demand. It's a 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Mountain Time with a lunch break. A small group, relatively speaking, 24 is our limit. It'll be a dialogue. You can ask specific questions about your child. All of these are an attempt to give you more, not just lecturing, not just podcasts and webinars and books and blogs, but to be able to, for me, to be able to relate to you personally, to give you a taste of the kind of therapy that I would do if you were my client. The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, my two books, are on Amazon and Audible. I narrated The Audacity to Be You myself, so I was excited to do that. If you want to do a deep dive, I cannot overemphasize this. I know it's the holiday season, but December 7th through 11th is our next in-person Finding You. So if you're interested, this is the last week to sign up for it. December 7th through 11th. It's the best use of time and money that I can possibly think of. If there was a better use of it, I would create it, that I know of. I would create it. January 27th through 29th next year, we also have an online offering. The online offering is half the time, less than half the price. So if those two variables matter to you, it's a great, great option to do it online. Contact intensives@evoketherapy.com. For support groups, we have one tomorrow night, November 23rd, for wilderness families, current and alumni. And we also have once a month an alumni only meeting. One's happening tonight, so if you're there, you're not here. But the next one will be December 27th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And then once a month, we have one for the intensives folks, December 13th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Contact Malia@evoketherapy.com. If you would like a coach for individual work, couples work, family work, parenting work, we have attachment trained therapists at Evoke and coaches who can do coaching for you virtually anywhere in the country, Zoom, Skype, what have you. A fantastic option. We have Pursuits Adventure Trips for adults, young adults, and families anywhere in the world, 3 to 30-day programs. My own child did one for 30 days in the Dominican Republic, learned to become advanced certified scuba diver, had a wonderful experience and a difficult one. And we got some good work done. They last anywhere from 3 to 30 days. Contact Sarah@evoketherapy.com. Sarah is spelled S-A-R-A, no H. Sarah@evoketherapy.com. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support group meetings, any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous. I really love adult children because it goes right to the source. Adult children of alcoholics, they also refer to it as adult children of dysfunctional families, so you don't have to have alcoholic parents for it to be a good fit. RefugeRecovery.org and NAMI.org are also great organizations that offer free classes and resources in local communities. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can also find us on soundcloud.com on your computer, or Evoke's YouTube channel has video presentations, rebroadcasts of these broadcasts if you want to see the slides and you want to see my face moving. You can find Evoke Therapy and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles @EvokeTherapy and @DrBradReedy, respectively. You can find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle @EvokeTherapyIntensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And then the Evoke Therapy blog has new content each week. If you want to get back and it's the end of the year, and you're looking for a tax write-off and you want to provide resources for people that can't afford treatment, the partners that we work with are choosementalhealth.org, sky'sthelimitfund.org, and evokefamilyfoundation.org. Go to their websites to donate there. My next broadcast will be November 29th at 6:30 p.m. That's next week after the holiday, and I'll be talking about authentic gratitude. So looking forward to that. All right, folks. Thank you for on behalf of the people that love you and that you love. Thank you for showing up and being willing to do your work. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. I hope you have a safe holiday weekend. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.